Have you offered yourself as leader?
I just started thinking about it.
Canada needs more of this type of change. Change that puts more money in people's pockets. Change that makes our companies more competitive. Change that builds the strongest economy in the G7.
Who is Mark Carney? What does he stand for? And can he lead a country, not just a bank?
With the federal Canadian election coming up, and as a new Canadian voting for the first time, I want to understand who the major players really are, so that I could put my vote to a good use.
Today, we're looking at Mark Carney's career, and we have looked at Pierre Poilievre in a separate video. You can find it right here. Mark Carney is a banker, not a politician. He spent most of his life not in parliament, but in boardrooms, briefing rooms, and the most powerful financial institutions in the world. Born in 1965 in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, Carney was raised in Edmonton along with two brothers and a sister. Both of his parents were educators on school and university level, instilling strong values of education and intellectual curiosity in their children. Mark chose an economic degree from Harvard, then a master's and a PhD from Oxford. His choice of schools quickly put him in the Ivy League elitist circles, although the career paths that he chose throughout are nonconformist for the typical finance bra. Now, before we go any further, we'll say that finding information on Carney was harder than we thought. Working in the private sector as opposed to being in the public office does leave a mark on how much you can find. But here's what we know.
Fresh out of Harvard, Carney joined Goldman Sachs. In the world of finance, getting a job at Goldman Sachs is a definition of you made it, but not for Carney. 5 years later, he walked away, trading banking bonuses for a PhD at Oxford and getting head deep into economic theory and policy. What was his area of focus, you might wonder? His thesis was titled The Dynamic Advantage of Competition, exploring how increased domestic competition can improve firm performance and national welfare. He stressed a direct relationship between the two. After his PhD, Carney returned to Goldman, where in the span of the following 8 years he's worked across continents in London, Tokyo, New York and Toronto. His team helped post-apartheid South Africa to gain access to international bond markets to rebuild global trust. He also was part of the team that advised Russia as it navigated the economic default in 1998.
I still remember that year. Overnight, the country's financial system was paralyzed as it defaulted on the domestic debt. I cannot speak of how well it was handled, but I do remember that the early 2000s were probably some of the best and the most hopeful years of modern Russia, in my opinion. It is likely that Mark's deep expertise in macroeconomics and dealing with the crises is exactly what landed him a gig as the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada in 2003. Over the next 10 years, he moved up to lead the Bank of Canada, serving under both Liberal and Conservative finance ministers. Notably, Carney doesn't seem to have a specific record of formal affiliation to any party, except for times when he was advising a specific party minister. What Mr. Carney did during his years in public service could tell us a lot about what he stands for, and we can try to get a sense of what guides his decisions. One of his first economic projects was targeting trust taxation under the Harper government, effectively adding a tax burden on trust structures to bring more tax fairness. This reform was controversial for a number of reasons. For one, Harper simply broke his election promise not to do that. And second, a lot of investors, especially retirees, used trust structures as a legal tax avoidance mechanism. Critics argued that this reform was introduced abruptly and without transparency, leading to billions of dollars of losses for thousands of retail investors.
It clearly states, preserve income trusts by not imposing any new taxes on them.
Another memorable project is helping bring the privatization of Petro-Canada to the finish line, selling the remaining 19% stake to the private sector. This was part of the government's larger intent to focus on more environment-friendly investments, as well as an attempt to raise funds for the government. Critics argued that it was a short-term fiscal solution that put longer-term national interest at risk. After all, energy is a significant part of Canada's economy.
This is going to be one of the watershed days in financial markets history.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets. The Dow tumbled more than 500 points after two pillars of the street tumbled over the weekend. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old firm, filed for bankruptcy.
Just at the brink of the global financial crisis in 2008, Carney became the youngest governor of the Bank of Canada at 43 years of age. This was a massive test. We all know that the US and European banks collapsed under the weight of the subprime mortgage crisis, but Canada's banks were more resilient.
One place where none of this banking drama is taking place is Canada.
This resilient banking structure was already in place before Carney became governor in 2008.
If you wouldn't put your mother-in-law in this, don't put our clients in it.
The system's conservative, cautious regulation and risk-averse banking culture gave it strong bones. Nevertheless, the decisions Carney made helped make Canada a rare success story. While other banking systems crumbled, Canada's remained stable. His approach? Cautious regulation, conservative lending practices, strong oversight, and clear communication instilling public confidence and trust. It worked so well that Carney was praised globally. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He later became the first non-Briton to lead the Bank of England, largely because of how he handled the crisis in Canada.
From no job to one of England's top jobs, Mark Carney, Canada's top banker, is jumping ship. Though Carney said for months it wasn't a job he wanted, today he announced he is taking over as head of the Bank of England. The first time in the 318-year history of that bank, a foreigner has been appointed.
Why him? The answer is simple: credibility. The UK, still recovering from recession and heading into the fog of Brexit, wanted someone who was cool under pressure.
Carney is no ordinary central banker.
He's being described as a financial rock star.
And fluent in global finance. This is probably the same premise under which Carney has become a person of interest for the Liberal Party leadership, before even having official membership there.
If I had political ambitions, I would have pursued them.
But let's look at what he was up to in England first. As the new governor of Bank of England, Mr. Carney walked into a complete mess. Even 5 years later, the scars of the 2008 crisis still hadn't healed. Unstable inflation, fragile growth, and later on, Brexit. What he did next to address the issues was done in the same cold and calculated style as he handled the Bank of Canada. Carney introduced forward guidance, a policy linking interest rate decisions to unemployment rates, aiming to provide clarity and stability to markets. His methods were praised for bringing a measured and transparent approach to monetary policy. But some critics argued that the forward guidance was too rigid and didn't account for rapid economic changes. That got him a nickname, Unreliable Boyfriend, because the bank's actions often did not follow his own guidance, confusing the markets. Mark would also ruthlessly flag economic risks of Brexit, and many didn't appreciate that. He was accused of politicizing the bank by those pushing for Brexit, while others said that he was just doing his job as the chief economist of the country, stating facts, even if they are unpopular. Inflation is often looked as one of the main metrics to assess the success of the country's government and the financial system. And low inflation is one of the things that Carney was not able to achieve in his role in England. The bank struggled to hit its 2% inflation goal under his watch, missing inflation targets prompting debate whether Mark's decisions were effective. Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, the shortest-serving Prime Minister in the modern British history, has publicly criticized Mark Carney, asserting that his tenure as the government of the Bank of England was detrimental to the country's economy.
If you're looking at reasons why the British economy has stagnated, why people's income per capita is now lower than Mississippi, which is the poorest state in America, I think a lot of the fingers can be pointed at the Bank of England.
Transitioning to net zero as rapidly as necessary.
Much more carbon efficient fuels.
One of the most controversial parts of Carney's profile, though, is his deep focus on climate action.
The United Nations incoming Special Envoy for Climate Change has a bleak message about global warming.
But climate change is a tragedy of the horizon. The catastrophic impacts of climate change will be felt beyond the traditional horizons of most actors. It will impose costs on future generations that the current one has little direct incentive to fix.
In 2018, Carney famously called climate change a catastrophic financial risk, pushing banks and insurers to disclose exposure. Shortly after, Carney went all in on all matters climate. He became the UN climate envoy, pressuring banks to defund fossil fuels, promoting finance industry's net zero emission goals, and being generally pro-carbon tax. He also wrote a book that critiques the idea that markets should always come first, and instead advocates for an economic model that puts human values like fairness, sustainability, and solidarity at the center. The book was praised by its insightful analysis. Others critiqued it for not challenging the status quo enough. Simultaneously, Carney held board positions in companies focusing on money over climate, and this has drawn a lot of criticism.
On one hand, Carney has been a high-profile champion of net zero initiatives, speaking at summits, leading financial alliances, and urging the world's banks to divest from carbon-heavy industries. On the other hand, he served as vice chair of Brookfield Asset Management, a firm with substantial fossil fuel holdings. While he was likely brought in to specifically focus on ESG and impact investing, it is not entirely clear whether the net zero status was really reached, or maybe it was just a simple accounting gymnastics, since some of the firm's own emission reports tell a rather different story. His board roles at Bloomberg and Stripe also seem to have a sustainability-focused character, but the true impact of this work is a little unclear. We do appreciate the intent to mobilize private finance to support the transition to a net zero economy.
So, with all that, what does Mark Carney actually stand for?
Carney is a market realist. He believes in capitalism, but also thinks that it needs stronger rules and a clear moral compass. He focuses on stability, and we clearly saw that in how he steered UK and Canada's banks. He believes governments must avoid reckless deficits and focus on long-term financial stability, not short-term political wins.
He also prioritizes sustainable growth, emphasizes green infrastructure, clean tech investment, and climate risk management, not as charity, but as economic strategy.
Carney's communication style comes off as uninspiring. He speaks in paragraphs, focusing on delivering the message. He doesn't really have memorable punchlines.
So what does all this mean for Canadian voters?
Well, Carney hasn't held elected office. He wasn't even a member of any political party until just a few months ago. Nevertheless, somehow he popped up and is now Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, he actually popped up as early as 2020, when he became an informal financial advisor to the Prime Minister Trudeau. In 2024, he was formally appointed to chair the Liberal Party's task force on economic growth. Carney didn't get to do much beyond delivering a reportedly underwhelming speech. What happened next is where we are today.
Let's see what Carney is promising Canadians. Well, there is a whole website for that, and honestly there's a lot, on his personal website and also on the press releases of the Liberal website. You can go ahead and check these platforms out in a greater detail, because in this video we will just cover some broad strokes.
Mark Carney's One Canadian Economy platform pledges to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. This includes professional credential recognition to enhance labor mobility, facilitating interprovincial trade, and expediting approval processes for major infrastructure projects.
Critics argue that Carney's plan hinges on provincial cooperations. After all, some provinces may see it as potentially undermining provincial autonomy.
Economic Pillars for Change platform outlines focus on a bunch of things, but here are some highlights. Tax cuts. Reducing the marginal tax rate on the lowest tax bracket by 1 percentage point. Government efficiency. Reduce spending and deploy AI across federal government services. As for the military, he pledges to meet our 2% NATO target by the end of the decade.
Critics question the practicality of rapidly implementing such grandiose and widespread reforms, and are cautious about over-relying on AI that still likes to make things up.
Mark Carney's housing plan aims to double the pace of new home construction over the next decade. The strategy emphasizes innovation in building techniques, such as supporting prefabricated and modular housing, and expanding the construction workforce through enhanced training programs. To reduce costs and expedite development, Carney proposes cutting red tape, lowering fees, and streamlining permitting processes. The plan also includes eliminating the GST for first-time homebuyers on properties under $1 million.
Critics argue, though, that Carney's housing plan risks federal overreach into provincial and municipal jurisdictions, particularly around zoning and permitting. Aggressive housing goals are also likely underestimating current supply chain and labor dynamics.
Mark Carney's Spend Less, Invest More plan proposes a new fiscal framework for Canada, aiming to balance the federal operating budget within 3 years by curbing wasteful spending and capping the size of the public service. The plan emphasizes reallocating resources towards capital investments in areas like housing, clean energy, and AI infrastructure to stimulate economic growth and job creation. Carney wants to make government more efficient by using technology, removing unnecessary regulations and bureaucratic procedures that hinder progress, without cutting key support for people and provinces. He also plans to pass laws to make sure major spending focuses on the economy's top needs and is closely monitored by the Parliamentary Budget Officer.
Critics, on the other hand, argue that Mr. Carney's plan may overestimate the efficiency gains from the technology, while risking cuts to essential public services through staffing caps and spending reductions. Mr. Carney also wants to be tough on crime. His public safety plan includes hiring 2,000 of new RCMP and border officers, tightening bail rules, and banning assault-style firearms.
Critics warn it could lead to over-policing and disproportionately affect marginalized groups.
Obviously, being the climate advocate, Carney has a plan for our climate policy too. Mark Carney's climate plan centers on replacing Canada's consumer carbon tax with incentives to encourage greener choices, such as purchasing energy-efficient appliances, electric vehicles, and improving home insulation.
Critics argue that the incentive is just a new word for tax.
Whether or not Carney stands the chance to bring all this to life, that's a question for all Canadians.
Mark Carney isn't flashy. He doesn't work a crowd or throw punches.
He's an introverted technocrat, but he's also someone who might appeal to Canadians tired of polarization, someone who can explain inflation in a way that's actually accurate.
But can a banker become a builder of national unity?
Can Mark Carney survive the political games? And most importantly, can he deliver on his broad and ambitious promises?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.